EM5 Mark II was released in February 2012 and critics loved it. They said it's built like a tank, it looks cool, and the images look pretty great. But it's 2023 now. Let's see how well it stacks up. Full disclosure, I bought this on MPB for €230, so incredible bargain. It was missing a little silicone piece that your thumb rests on, and I fixed that by 3D printing a little thumb mount. First of all, the design. It's just timeless, right? Olympus has used this design back on their 35mm OM systems, and even now with like their EOS M10 and their OM5, which is like their second iteration of this camera since this camera, so like the fourth iteration, right? They've kept pretty much the same aesthetic. And I love it, particularly with the silver bit at the top. Does it make me feel like a cool little hipster? Yeah. Do I like it still? Yes. Does it make me want to use this camera more because it looks cool? Yes. Build quality wise as well, it is just built like a tank. I could hammer a nail into a piece of wood with this camera and it would probably survive. It's a fully magnesium alloy body and it's weather sealed. Let me tell you, I live in Ireland where weather sealing is needed quite a lot. Weather sealing is just a massive, massive plus in my opinion. Even if you live in the driest, most not dusty place, it's going to rain once in a while, and if you're doing any kind of landscape photography or even street photography, I think weather sealing is essential. So I should say what drew me to this camera anyway. I already have a Lumix G9, which is better than this camera in every way on paper, except for one thing. This has live composite mode, and what that essentially is it takes an image and then it will only record changes in light. So for star trails or light painting or light trails, this is great. This one is by far my favorite. It's my wallpaper on everything at the moment, and that's just 20 minutes of star trails outside my house. I would buy this camera just for live composite if that's all it did, particularly at the price I got it for. So other features we have, it's a 16 megapixel MicroFourThirds sensor, not the highest resolution, and because it's low megapixels, you get slightly less noise than you would on a sensor with more megapixels. I find it pretty decent. I can still crop in a bit. I could probably print about A2 size if I needed. The images this thing produces are absolutely fantastic. This camera has handled everything I've thrown at it. So even dark, moody days, it's been able to capture everything in detail. Nothing's been underexposed. On bright, shiny days, like the other day, I was at Salt Hill in Galway, and absolutely no issues with highlights being overexposed on the bright water or anything. So video wise, I should just say right off the bat, this thing only does 1080p video, but the stabilization makes it really nice 1080p video. If you're after like a vlogging camera and you want 1080p video, then I think this is ideal. Maybe not with this lens, something a bit wider, maybe the Olympus 17mm. We have a mic in, so I could take this little wireless lab system I'm using at the moment, plug it into this and have a pretty nice vlogging setup if I wanted. I'll stick with some test footage now. This is handheld and the stabilization just makes it all nice and smooth. Should talk about the stabilization for pictures as well. It's just great. So I've it set so the stabilization only kicks in when I half press the shutter, and I could be intentionally shaking this camera like an old person pouring juice, but when I half press that shutter, it's just buttery smooth. So autofocus is pretty decent because it doesn't have a joystick or anything like that. Use the D-pad here to set where you want your autofocus to be. I normally just let it choose an autofocus point, but if there's something specific, I can go and choose on a grid where I want it to autofocus. I found it works pretty on par with most mirrorless cameras that I've tried. It's definitely faster than any DSLR that I've tried. Pretty fast autofocus and pretty accurate autofocus. Olympus gets a bit of a bad rep for their menus. So I've shot Canon with their DSLRs, I've shot the EOS M mirrorless system, and I've shot with a Lumix G9. All their menus, pretty intuitive, and you can kind of just figure stuff out. On those cameras, I never had to Google anything. I had to Google how to turn off the beep on this camera. But then someone over in the MicroFourThirds Facebook group pointed out their menu system's almost alphabetized, right? So autofocus and everything to do with it is under A, B is for buttons, D is displays, and so on and so on. That helped a lot, and I've really been able to set this camera up to be how I like it. And how I've done that is because I've added this grip, the back dial is a little bit obscured. I can still turn it. So what I've done is set the front dial to be my aperture. I shoot an aperture priority anyway most of the time, so being able to adjust that is crucial. And the back dial then is set for exposure compensation, which I don't really need because I find that the camera does a pretty good job of exposing for itself anyway. But if I want to make the scene more dark or more bright in camera, then I can still turn that dial. I've left the buttons on top matte as they are. This camera even has a HDR button which when you press it will take the 3 images and merge them in camera. The EVF is actually just brilliant as well. I've tried other EVFs where the refresh rate's a bit slow and you almost get like motion sick using it. No problem with this. It's fully customizable. You want a histogram, you can stick it up there. You want grid lines on, you can stick it up there as well. The screen, fully articulating, which for walkabout style photography, if you're like wanting to get some stuff low to the ground or street style stuff where you're getting weird angles, brilliant. For video, brilliant. It took me a while to get used to just using a new camera body, but after about a week, I can do everything I need to do on this camera with my eyes closed. We have a single SD card slot, which is to be expected for a body at this price point from this era, at this size. My G9 has 2, and I like having 2 just for the redundancy. I just make sure that as soon as I'm home, everything gets imported. The camera does have Wi-Fi, and yeah, you can use it, but I just don't see the point of really using Wi-Fi on cameras, short of maybe if you're wanting to do some self-portraits and you use it to like monitor and set up your composition and stuff. But it is there if that's something that you like. Size-wise, the camera is just great. It's a little bit small. I have quite big hands, and I kind of don't know what to do with my pinky finger half the time, so it kind of rests there in the lens or under the camera. It's really nice and small. It's really inconspicuous for street photography. With this, I'm more confident doing street photography than on my big G9. And I think that's because the G9 looks a bit too big and professional. People are like, oh, what's he taking photos for? As opposed to this, which I probably look like I'm shooting an old film camera, right? Particularly with the silver top. It's so cool looking. And I said in my G9 review, if a camera looks cool, it takes better pictures. Do you know why? It's because you want to use it more. And I really, every time I see this, I want to go and use it. So I think if you are after a camera for street photography, some vlogging stuff maybe, and just that's weather sealed, can use the MicroFourThirds mount. I have a whole video here where I discuss why I love MicroFourThirds, and one of the big takeaways from that is just the availability of lenses. Because this mirrorless system is so, I don't want to say old, so I'll say seasoned, because it's such a well-seasoned system. There's all these different lenses that aren't mad money. I compare this body with a 12 to 32 pancake zoom, which I really want to pick up, and then it'll be pocketable. Like, I'd probably, if I had like cargo shorts, I could stick that in my pocket and have a pocketable camera. Emily over at MicroFourThirds, great channel, has a whole series where she discusses tiny cameras, and she actually did one on the EM5 Mark I, which is where I got the idea for this. And I was going to pick up the Mark I, but I saw that this specific one was dirt cheap, and I just had to get it. Pros are small body, weather sealed, small megapixels, and I mean that genuinely. I take a lot of photos and storage is expensive, so being able to store like hundreds and hundreds of these 16 megapixel files is a lot more beneficial to me than being able to store a few 80 megapixel files. It does have a high resolution mode if that's something you're interested in, if you're shooting on a tripod or against a railing or whatever. It'll like move the sensor and stitch it and you get a 50 megapixel file. If you do want to get some high resolution images, up to 16 megapixels isn't high resolution. You can do that. There's a lot of camera here in such a small body for a small price, and if you can get yourself a bargain, I think you'd be hard pushed to find a better system, especially when you consider the lenses. So what do you think? Are you going to pick up a EM5 Mark II? Do you have any problems with it? Have you used an EM5 Mark II or whatever? Just let me know in the comments. I really enjoy replying to people in the comments and hearing their perspectives on things. If you want to see more content on MicroFourThirds, please give a subscribe. I'm going to do some more photography vlog style stuff. Thanks for watching. Cheers.